The cyclic civilizations theory tells us that we came from a long line of advanced species before us. So humans were not beasts or dumb mammals at any point, but perhaps even more advanced than we are now. Is there any sense in this? Who are the advanced ages that have recurred before our time? What evidence is available to back their existence? And more importantly, what happened to the previous civilizations before us? In 1926, a curious set of books hit the shelves and ignited the imagination of the Western world. The author, James Churchward. This British soldier-turned-writer suddenly released his trilogy, The Lost Continent of Mu, The Children of Mu, and The Sacred Symbols of Mu. No one knew, but this man would forever etch the word Mu into the vocabulary of history. Churchward wasn't just speculating. He claimed he had proof he carried with him for half a century since his younger days stationed in colonial India. While he was serving there, he befriended a temple priest who, on one afternoon, unveiled a secret that would alter the soldier's destiny. The priest revealed a collection of ancient stone-like tablets, sun-baked and cracked with age. But these weren't ordinary relics. They contained inscriptions in a language that no one alive seemed to understand. Well, except for the priest and a handful of guardians scattered across India. The priest called it the Nagamaya language, an ancient lingo. Fascinated by the tablets, Churchward struck a deal. If the priest would teach him this forgotten language, he would safeguard and restore the fragile tablets. And so his journey of translation began. And when he was done translating the information on the tablets, he was shaken. In his trilogy, Churchward wrote that the tablets described the birth of Earth itself, the rise of Mu, and a race of beings known as the Nakal. This Mu civilization had flourished tens of thousands of years ago, between 50,000 and 12,000 BCE, in a land larger than South America. Unbelievable. But it doesn't end there. As opposed to what you might be thinking, Mu was not a primitive outpost. This was home to over 64 million inhabitants organized into 10 tribes, united under a single government and one religion. Its people built 7 great cities, with colonies that stretched across the globe. He even wrote that they were superior in many respects to our own. And where was this place located? You guessed right. Here on Earth, in the Pacific Ocean. According to Churchward, Mu stretched east to west from the Marianas to Easter Island, north to south from Hawaii to Mangaia. Not only was the land vast in size, but Churchward described it as lush and bountiful, a land filled with rivers, hills, and fertile plains. This seemed like the perfect place for the kind of inhabitants that James Churchward described. According to him, they were not ordinary. They were a race of godlike humans who may have been the true ancestors of civilization. Before you know it, what began as markings on clay tablets soon transformed into a vision of an entire continent and the haunting suggestion that humanity had lived advanced lives long before recorded history ever began. And like Churchward revealed, maybe Mu was the mother of them all. Of course, we can't bank on one person's testimony to solidify the tale that a mother civilization once existed. This is where the physical clues come into play, and the top pointers of the Mu civilization are the giants of Easter Island. This first striking clue that points toward a lost mother civilization stands silently on a remote Pacific island. We are talking about the Moai statues of Easter Island. These are the towering stone guardians carved by the Rapa Nui people between 1250 and 1500 CE. But let's be clear, these are no ordinary statues. One glance at their oversized heads, which are 3 times larger than their bodies, and you realize the builders weren't just carving rocks. They were making statements too hard to ignore. The tallest of the statues, known as Paro, rises 10 meters high and weighs a staggering 82 tons. Imagine moving something like that without modern cranes. When outsiders asked the Rapa Nui why they built the moai, they said the statues honored their ancestors. But that answer only sparks a bigger mystery. Who exactly were those ancestors? And where did they come from? Here's where things get interesting. The location of Easter Island sits neatly inside the boundaries that James Churchward claimed for the vanished continent of Mu. So, what if the Rapa Nui weren't just isolated islanders, but descendants of Mu's survivors? That idea flips the entire narrative. Think about it. Why else would a small community on a remote island attempt something so massive, so technically demanding, unless they were replicating lessons passed down from a forgotten civilization? The moai weren't built from just any material either. The Rapa Nui used volcanic tuff, a soft but durable rock formed from compressed ash, straight from the crater of Rano Raraku, and from there they raised these monuments one after another. But here's the sticking point. Carving the moai is one thing. Moving them across miles of rugged terrain is another, and this is where the story takes a weird turn. Ask the oldest Rapa Nui elders how their ancestors moved the moai, and they'll give you a simple answer. The statues walked. Oral tradition insists that the moai moved themselves to their final resting places. As impossible as that sounds, it stuck for generations. Modern researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo believe there's truth in the legend. They proposed that the Rapa Nui used ropes to walk the statues upright, rocking them side to side until they shuffled into place. Others argue they rolled the giants on timber logs, a method that would have required enormous deforestation. And then there's the most controversial theory. This is the one Churchward himself favored, that the moai moved through spiritual power. If the statues really carried hidden energy, then maybe the Rapa Nui were right. Maybe the moai weren't just monuments. They are reminders that their ancestors were anything but ordinary humans. And if Easter Island's giants are not enough to prove that there are indeed recurring advanced ages, there's another clue scattered across the globe. This one ties humanity's greatest monuments into the same cyclical theory, and it is none other than the pyramids. But before we talk about the pyramids, there are other civilizations that have played a part in their construction. One of these civilizations is Atlantis. At around 360 BC, Greek philosopher Plato shared a story that still gives us chills till date. In his dialogues titled Timaeus and Critias, he spoke of an island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. The name of this island was Atlantis. According to Plato, Atlantis was no ordinary place. It was vast, rich, and beyond dazzling. Palaces were covered in precious metals. Canals beautifully crisscrossed the land, and fleets of ships ruled the seas. He didn't stop there. Plato described the people as masters of engineering, philosophy, and war. Long story short, Atlantis had it all. But the story gets interesting. After a while, the Atlanteans got greedy. They pushed for conquest, power, and domination. And according to Plato, the gods had seen enough. Because of the fuming rebellion, the rulers had to teach them a lesson. So in a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis sank beneath the sea. According to scholars, Plato was spinning an allegory about pride before a fall. But was that really the case? What if he was recording the story of a once great civilization that nature itself wiped clean? Now let's fast forward about 12,000 years. Around 10,800 BCE, the Earth entered the Younger Dryas. This is a period of violent climate upheaval. Temperatures suddenly began to plummet. Ice sheets collapsed like buildings with shabby concrete. Sea levels surged over 400 feet. These were all incredibly unusual stats. Some researchers even argue that a comet impact set off global flooding and firestorms. Does this ring a bell? This almost coincides with the exact timeline that Plato gave for Atlantis. And this is where it gets eerie. Under the oceans, ruins keep popping up. Off the coast of Japan, there lies Yonaguni, a stone structure that looks like a sunken city. Also, off India's coast, there is the legendary city of Dwarka, which is now underwater. Even in the Caribbean and Mediterranean, the sonar technique reveals whole landscapes hidden beneath the waves. Perhaps Plato wasn't inventing a myth after all. Atlantis was his own way of preserving a memory. It rings like a final warning that even the greatest civilizations can vanish overnight. And if it has happened before, what makes us think it can't happen again? While you think about that, it's high time we talked about the empire that suddenly disappeared. This is another civilization that met an absurd end, and this proves that the cyclic civilization theory might hold more water than you think. Take a look at maps from the 1500s all the way up to the 1800s. For over 3 centuries, European maps showed a massive land called Tartaria, also known as Grand Tartary. Ever heard of it? These maps were detailed charts by French, Dutch, German, and English mapmakers, and they all agreed Tartaria stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean and from Siberia deep into Central Asia. Some maps even divided it into Russian Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and independent Tartary. So here's the big question. How does a civilization that enormous just vanish? By the mid-1800s, Tartaria suddenly began to disappear. Geography books stopped mentioning it, atlases dropped its name. At once, an empire that once filled maps for 300 years had no place in history. What happened to Tartaria? We can answer this question by drawing clues from surrounding events. At about the same time Tartaria vanished, something interesting happened in Europe and America. Suddenly, cities exploded with grand architecture. Government buildings, train stations, exhibition halls, entire boulevards lined with monumental stonework, you name it. They all appeared almost overnight in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Take San Francisco, for example. After the 1906 earthquake, the city supposedly rebuilt itself in just a few years. And it did so with structures that even today's engineers find jaw-dropping. Normally, recovering from such devastation should have taken decades. Yet somehow elaborate stone facades and massive civic buildings rose almost instantly. Or look at Chicago's World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. The so-called White City sprawled across 600 acres with over 200 ornate buildings, including the largest building in the world at the time. And we're told it was all designed and built in just 2 years. 2 years. We are talking entire complexes with domes, columns, and ironwork so advanced they still baffle modern builders. And then, something strange happened. Out of the blue, most of these buildings were torn down immediately after the fairs. Why invest a lot of money in constructing monumental architecture only to destroy it? Unless they weren't new at all. What if they were renovated Tartarian buildings erased before too many questions could be asked? Tartarian theorists point to another smoking gun, the Great Mud Flood. Walk through old quarters of Seattle, New York, or St. Petersburg, and you'll notice something odd. Grand buildings sunk into the ground, first floors buried, windows peeking out at street level. Mainstream historians call it urban development, that is, cities raising street levels over time. But Tartarian researchers argue the scale is too large, too sudden. They say a global catastrophe in the 1800s buried entire cities in mud and debris, leaving only rooftops and upper floors visible. Seattle's underground confirms it too. Entire districts were buried and rebuilt on higher ground. Similar patterns also appear worldwide. Add this to the timing, right when Tartaria disappeared, and you get a chilling possibility. A cataclysm wiped out the empire, and the survivors' buildings were passed off as someone else's work. It doesn't end here. The buildings in the Tartarian Empire were so advanced that they baffled modern engineers. How was a backdated civilization able to achieve such a feat, if not that they were also advanced themselves? This says it all. Maybe we are not the first civilization, and we did not move from cavemen to Homo sapiens. What if we are just going round in circles? What do you think?